let's talk about faith. There's so much misconception about what faith is. It is an idea, is it a concept? Is it this image that just floats around that we grab a hold of? Is it a false hope? Faith in Greek is pistis, which means hope based on a promise. There's an anchor to this. So biblical faith is not some hypothetical. Biblical faith has a handle you can grab on it and hold on to this. It's not something that's way out there so far that you can't get it. It's right here. It's tangible because it is a hope based on a promise. And the hope that is based on his promise is only as good as the promise maker. So you have to look at the history of who's making the promise. So we look at Jehovah and the promises that he's made throughout the scriptures. See, we can't just discard the Old Testament because Jesus has come, that grace has come, there is no longer law. That would erase all the promises because we would not understand what grace is without having the Torah. We would not understand what Torah is without having grace. They're all one and the same. And that is hard to get our Western mind to wrap around that concept because we think law is such an evil thing because we distort the writings of Paul. But Paul wrote in Romans chapter 10, verse 17, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So faith, hope based on a promise, comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. What was the word of God? The New Testament has not been compiled yet. He had to have been talking about the law, the writings of the prophets, the whole Old Testament, the spoken words of Jehovah. So, let's look at this. That faith comes by, or comes out of, hearing a proclamation, hearing an instruction. That word hearing is not just a listening. It has a message attached to it. It's just not auditory, being able to hear. It is hope based on a promise, comes out of hearing a message. And hearing a message comes out of the Word of God, with the Debar of God, the mouth. Anything that comes from the mouth speaks from the mouth of Jehovah. So, grace, hyper grace says, oh, we discard the New Testament, we're under grace. So we all of a sudden lose faith if we discard the Old Testament. We lose faith because without the Old Testament, there is no promise. So we say, oh, we're in the New Testament, we received the promise. How do you know what the promise is if you discarded the Old Testament? So hope based on a promise comes out of hearing the instructions, the law. If you look at that word, hearing, it means to hear an instruction, to hear a command. So hope based on a promise comes out of hearing a command. And hearing commands comes out of the voice of God, the Word of God. Put all that together. It's like faith is built on the commandments. How is that possible? Paul's like, we do not need to. In Acts, I think it's Acts chapter 12, he talks about we do not need to burden the Gentiles. Do not burden the Gentiles. But tell them to abstain from meats strangled and sacrificed by idols and to keep themselves pure. That's the law. So that's partial of what the Torah commands. Abstinence, purity, and not eating unclean foods. That's pretty much the commandments. But he didn't tell them, hey, you need to love the Lord your God with all your heart. You need to do this, you need to do this. No, because you can't teach babies to run overnight. That's what faith is all about. It is growing. It is something that develops. It's like a muscle when you exercise it, when you stretch it, when you put it under tension, when you tear it and build it back up. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is what faith must be. A growth process, that hope based on a promise that has been given by the promise giver. Comes by, it is manifest out of hearing the instructions of which come out of the mouth of God. That is an insane corollary to the Old Testament. That people say, oh, Paul throws away the Old Testament. The law is no longer. Look at the writing. Faith comes by hearing the instructions, and the instructions come by the mouth of the Father. You can't get any more Old Testament than that. Jesus was the Word of God. He echoed the Father. If he said anything that the Father did not say, then he is a false prophet. But he did not. He echoed the Father perfectly. He did not speak anything contrary to the law, to the commandments, to the writings, or to the prophets. He encompassed all of that and said, I have not come to abolish the law, but pleru means I have come to uphold the law, to establish the law. Hope based on a promise comes by hearing the instructions, and then hearing the instruction come by the Word of God. So in order to understand the instructions, we must understand the Word of God. We must understand what has been spoken. We must dive into the commandments, to the law, to the prophets, to the words of Jesus, because they all are complementary. They're not disconnected. They're not polar opposites. They are not exclusive. They are inclusive. Law, love, commandments, hope, grace are all together in the same function. When we separate them, we've created heresy because we misinterpret the writings of Paul, as Peter says in 2 Peter in his last chapter, that people are unstable, twist Paul's words because they do not know the law. They do not know the writings. They do not know the prophets. So I implore you that the hope based on a promise, faith, must be built on understanding who Jehovah is. Faith is rooted in knowing who he is. So we must understand who he is in order to have faith. It's not something we just go, wow, I've had faith. No. Faith is built upon the apostles and prophets, and Jesus is the chief cornerstone. That's what it says in the New Testament. So let's get back to the basics and understand the heart of the Father. Understand the words that were spoken by him, and not just run hyper grace or hyper law, but put grace and law together, because they are not meant to be separated. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Jehovah.